Hello from the Center for Livable Cities in Singapore, and a warm welcome to the 5th episode of our CLC webinar series, Cities Adapting to a Disrupted World. I'm your host, Dinesh Naidu. Some 1,300 people from 55 countries registered for this webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to viewers around the world, especially to our audiences in the Americas. Thank you for joining us in the middle of the night. Today's webinar is titled Emerging Stronger, Healthy and Sustainable Infrastructure. Our partner in organizing today's webinar is Infrastructure Asia. We have a full program for you today, so let me jump right into some housekeeping matters. To listen to the simultaneous interpretation of this webinar in Mandarin, please go to the controls toolbar on Zoom, click on interpretation, and then select Chinese. In a few moments, I will introduce our keynote speaker, Minister Indrani Raja. Following her address, our guest moderator, Mr. Seth Tan, will moderate a dialogue and audience Q&A with our panelists, Mr. Pang Yi-Yen and Mr. Loh Ah Tuan. Some of you have already submitted questions when you registered for this webinar, but you can still pose new questions by clicking on the Q&A tab. For those who'd like a copy, you can download the panelist slide from our CLC website. Now, I'm very glad to welcome and introduce today's keynote speaker, Minister Indrani Raja. She is the Minister in the Prime Minister's office here in Singapore. She is also Second Minister for Finance and Education. Before joining government, she practiced as a lawyer and senior counsel. Minister Indrani was due to give a keynote speech at our World City Summit before it got rescheduled to June 2021. So we are very glad that she's able to join us today. Without further ado, Minister Indrani Raja, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. I would normally say good afternoon to everyone, but given that so many people are in different time zones, I would just say welcome, and I'm very glad to be here with you. I'm very pleased to join you at the session, which is organized by the Center for Livable Cities and Infrastructure Asia. So COVID-19 has dealt a major shock to the global economy, public health systems, and infrastructure, as well as disrupted lives and livelihoods of many. It has also accelerated many structural changes that were already evident pre-COVID, such as digitalization. The impact and challenges to major cities and business models are even greater, considering the high density of populations, interconnected economic activities, people movements, and social interactions. Many cities around the world have undergone lockdowns and border closures, and some cities are tightening measures again after reopening following spikes in new cases. The International Monetary Fund expects the global economy to contract by 4.9% in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a larger impact on the economy in the first half of 2020, and recovery is projected to be more gradual than previously forecast. Governments around the world have been working hard to develop recovery strategies to help their nations improve resilience during these unprecedented times, and to be better prepared to ride the recovery and seize new growth opportunities when the storm subsides. Amid these challenging times, there are growth opportunities to mitigate these strong headwinds. One such opportunity is in infrastructure, which continues to be a bright spot that contributes to the long-term economic growth of many countries, increasing business activity and creating employment opportunities. The pandemic has amplified the importance of having resilient and adaptable infrastructure that can operate effectively in a crisis. The benefits of cleaner air and clearer skies resulting from a temporary pause in business and industrial activities over the past months have also prompted cities to redefine their priorities in creating a cleaner environment. Therefore, strategic projects that directly stimulate economic growth or are critical to public health are still underway. For example, Thailand allocated US $12 billion to rehabilitate its economy through projects that build local infrastructure and create jobs. a Keppel-led consortium has also won an engineering, procurement, and construction contract worth approximately Singapore dollars 1.5 billion for the development of a waste-to-energy facility and a materials recovery facility for Singapore's new Tuas Nexus integrated waste management facility in April this year. Infrastructure for environmental public health has emerged as a critical sector, alongside logistics and clean energy. The pandemic has demonstrated the importance of cities' infrastructure for public health, such as sanitation, hygiene, and adequate access to clean water and water disposal services. Reliable access to clean water and proper waste management have conventionally contributed to a country's sustainable development goals and have become even more important post-COVID-19. In Southeast Asia alone, waste generation has been increasing rapidly. By 2030, the amount is estimated to more than double the volume of the year 2000. Proper solid waste management is critical in building sustainable and healthy communities. The adoption of sustainable waste management systems, such as waste-to-energy or WTE technologies, is necessary to enable cities to manage their municipal solid waste. This could be achieved through environmentally friendly and efficient combustion or biotreatment processes to recover the heat value of the waste and convert it to usable steam, electricity, or fertilizers. Similarly, in Asia today, 300 million people do not have access to water, and 1.5 billion lack basic sanitation. These gaps have to be addressed. Singapore's founding leaders recognized that basic public health standards would serve as a strong foundation for economic growth. It was only with the right policies that we could systematically address these challenges. Strong governance and a well-planned roadmap have provided a robust structure to guide Singapore's infrastructure development. The pandemic calls for greater collaboration between the public and private sector. To build sustainable and healthy cities, it's critical to get governance, legal processes in place, and adopt a systems approach towards tackling issues such as water and waste management. Through its various initiatives, the Centre for Livable Cities seeks to bring together Singapore's expertise on sustainable urban development and facilitate sharing of knowledge and best practices among cities in the region and globally. Singapore has accumulated strong players and capabilities in infrastructure for public health ecosystems over the years. On the technical front, the public and private sectors have solutions for water treatment and waste management. Singapore also houses significant activities in research and development involving clean technologies. In terms of governance and planning, we have long-term master plans to cope with waste volumes, increase our water security, and put in place monitoring mechanisms to ensure our infrastructure perform effectively and efficiently. On the financing front, Singapore houses major project finance banks, funds, insurers, and international investors. As a regional financial hub, Singapore is well placed to facilitate the financing required for the region's infrastructure development. But why do these factors matter, and how do they interplay? When governments lay out clear directions for infrastructure plans and put in place the right governance structure, the private sector will have more confidence to participate in the implementation process through the provision of technical and financial solutions. Singapore has an extensive range of companies offering solutions for water and waste management to meet increasing demands. For example, water treatment technology today aims to drive down treatment cost in areas like reverse osmosis to make the supply of water more secure and viable. Additional condition monitoring tools, such as sensors, can be adopted to detect water leaks in water supply pipelines. This all helps to make projects more economically viable while allowing governments to keep the water tariffs affordable. Funding from alternative funding sources may also be more important post-COVID. With resources being diverted towards COVID-19 recovery efforts, there is a strain on the government to publicly finance infrastructure. Multilateral development banks have stepped in quickly to provide fast and flexible responses to help developing countries recover from the pandemic. For example, the World Bank Group, Asian Development Bank, and the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank have all rolled out schemes to help countries cope with COVID-19 by providing funding, which can be used to finance the development of infrastructure for public health. However, funding need not only be limited to those provided by development finance institutions. Newer combinations of financing and tools to unlock international private sector capital is the way forward for infrastructure for public health. Today's webinar aims to seed some of these ideas. The newer financing combinations could comprise, firstly, working with multilateral development banks to develop newer ways of guaranteeing projects to increase investability. Second, increasing access to and tapping social funds. And third, adopting new technologies to increase commercial viability. Infrastructure Asia, which is the Infrastructure Project Facilitation Office set up by the Singapore government, has been actively working to develop and connect the newer approaches and solutions to meet the project requirements. For example, they have been working with facilities such as the Danida Sustainable Infrastructure Finance and ADB's ASEAN Catalytic Green Facility to promote the deployment of funds into this space. I believe that we have with us today two experienced practitioners who will be sharing more on increasing financing possibilities for infrastructure for public health in the next segment. So in closing, I would like to thank all the attendees today for your time, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion and your active participation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Minister. In these challenging times, it's good to hear that infrastructure remains a bright spot, but you also highlighted that it requires a systems approach. As you said, when governments lay out clear directions and put in place the right governance structure, the private sector will have more confidence to participate. Indeed, CLC has published research in our Urban System Studies or USS series that documents just how Singapore has done this, and viewers who are interested can look out for USS titles such as Financing a City or Working with Markets on our CLC website. Now, let me introduce our guests for the moderated dialogue and audience Q&A. On the panel, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Pang Yen. He is CEO of Sabana Jurong Capital, an investment platform of the Sabana Jurong Group, which focuses on financing of infrastructure and urban development. Prior to this, Ian was Director General of Investment Operations at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. Ian is an old friend of the World City Summit, or perhaps I should say young friend, since he was an active member of our WCS Young Leaders Network. I'm equally pleased to introduce another close friend of CLC, Mr. Loh Ah Tuan. He was the Director General and Deputy CEO of Singapore's National Environment Agency. Since his retirement in 2007, Mr. Loh continues to provide consultancy services in environmental planning and infrastructure development to private companies and governments. He is part of our CLC panel of experts and an advisor of MNY Singapore City Advisory Centre. Our guest moderator today is Mr. Seth Tan, the Executive Director of Infrastructure Asia. He has over 23 years of experience in the infrastructure sector, having worked on various opportunities across various infrastructure subsegments. Prior to this, he has held leadership roles in DBS Bank, BNP Paribas, Standard Bank, and Babcock & Brown. Infrastructure Asia is a key partner of the World City Summit, and we are glad to collaborate with them again here. With that, Seth, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dinesh. COVID-19 has and will continue to transform the way we live. This highlights the urgency of building a more sustainable and resilient future. As countries reboot, many have to refocus their priorities, and more are seeing that addressing infrastructure needs and gaps post-COVID is a viable strategy to support economic recovery whilst building resilience. And COVID-19 has shown us that reliable access to public health infrastructure such as water, sanitation, and waste management are critical in increasing the resilience of a city, particularly in the face of a pandemic. As COVID-19 responses have put a strain on many countries' public finances, the question is how to attract more international private finance, which remains liquid in current times, into infrastructure. It is therefore important to identify how the public and private sectors can work together more closely than before to elevate the economic benefits of such collaborations, and in turn bring more investment or possibilities to the market. I'd like to first invite Mr. Loh Ah Tuan. Mr. Loh has been looking into such infrastructure for decades and was amongst the 10 Singaporeans awarded a gold medal by former Prime Minister Mr. Lee Kuan Yew for his involvement in cleaning of Singapore River. I would like to invite him to share how cities can emerge stronger from COVID-19 pandemic by investing in sustainable infrastructure to enhance city health, how cities can become healthier, cleaner, and more resilient and more livable. With that, Mr. Loh, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Seth. I'm happy and honored to be here today to join you with this webinar. Like Minister have said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. Now, I would like to start by giving a short presentation. Okay, now a little bit of Singapore for our international participant who may not be too familiar with Singapore. Singapore is a small island city-state located about 2 degrees north of equator. We are a very small island city of area of about 720 square kilometers with a population of 5.7 million. And there's no natural resources. And because we are in the equatorial belt, we experience hot and humid weather throughout the year. Now, 55 years ago, in 1965, Singapore gained independence. At that time, Singapore was poor, unemployment rate was very high, sanitation was poor, the country was rather unhygienic. You can see from the picture below in this slide, you can see that rubbish is thrown all the back lane into the river, wastewater from households, from pig farms, from backyard industry, all discharging directly into the canals and the rivers. Today, Singaporeans enjoy clean air, clean water. In fact, Singapore is one of the very few cities in the world where you can drink water directly from the tap and that I don't get sick. And there's no mean feat. And Singaporeans also enjoy clean land and enjoy the high standard of public health. How did we do that? Within the span of half a century or so, how do we achieve clean air, clean water, clean land, and enjoy a high standard of public health? Essentially, is one key strategy in public health infrastructure. One, we have municipal solid waste management system and wastewater collection and treatment facility. Now, in any place where there are human activities, you would have solid waste and you have wastewater. Therefore, you need to have a system whereby you can collect and treat the solid waste as well as wastewater. Now, in Singapore, all our municipal waste has to be collected every day because of hot and humid weather condition. And if not collected, the solid waste will putrefy and decompose very rapidly, causing smell nuisance, flies nuisance, vermin nuisance, and worse still, potentially spread of diseases. So currently, all our municipal waste is collected every day from every household, and they are conveyed to our 4 waste-to-energy plant, WTE plants in Singapore, for incineration and generation of electricity. Now, for wastewater, since the middle of the 80s, all wastewater from all premises, domestic, commercial, industrial premises, will be channeled into a very comprehensive storage network, and is collected and treated and for reuse, for recycling, and is for disposal. Now that brings me to the next question, to the webinar. The question of this webinar are, how city can emerge stronger from COVID-19 pandemic by investing in sustainable infrastructure to enhance cities' health. 2, how cities can become healthier, cleaner, and more resilient and livable. These are the 2 issues that I thought we could discuss at this afternoon's webinar. To begin with, cities need to develop an infrastructure master plan and a comprehensive and effective master plan and roadmap. A master plan of an infrastructure essentially set the mission, the direction, and the strategy and action plan, etc., for an infrastructure, solid waste management, or wastewater collection and treatment system. Now, having a master plan, it lays a foundation, but it's just a top-line overview of what the city government should do. This master plan would only be useful when it is translated into roadmaps. The roadmap for individual infrastructure master plan is a roadmap of the development of infrastructure project for over, let's say, a 5-year or 10-year period, whereas a master plan can over a term of 20, 30, even 50 years period. The idea is that over the next 5, 10 years in a roadmap, we will all know that what are the infrastructure projects, whether it is a sewage network, water reclamation plant project, WTE plant project, sanitary project, sanitary landfill project, or transfer station. The roadmap should also include the project execution model. What I mean by this is this model can be EPC, engineering, procurement, construction model, or EPC plus operation maintenance model, or the PPP model, the private-public partnership model, which is very popular all over the world today, and or a merchant plant project. So this will set out this should be set up very clearly in the roadmap, so as to for interested party, MDBs or private sector, to know what exactly they will be going into. And it is important, the project structure is very important. This project structure must involve the whole of government approach. It cannot be a standalone, whether it is a municipal bureau project or it is a Ministry of the Environment project and so on. Must be a whole government approach project, because it involves financing, technical regulation, and so on and so forth. Now, more importantly, I'd like to highlight that the infrastructure master plan and roadmap must be an integral part of the city master plan. It cannot be a standalone project. This is my last slide. Why infrastructure master plan, infrastructure roadmap? Like the minister in her speech earlier said, that it builds confidence. In other words, it built not only confidence, investor confidence, MDB confidence, private sector confidence, and community confidence. What it will provide is that in a city like Singapore, it is a city with vision, city with discipline, city who want to achieve a livable Singapore. So building confidence is very important, because that will then nudge not only the private companies, but the MDBs, and to attract them to participate in the infrastructure project. The other thing about this infrastructure master plan as well as roadmap is, by having such a roadmap, it would allow private sectors, it would allow MDB to assess the risk of projects, whether it's a long-term project, short-term project, regulatory project, commercial project, financing project, union, financial risk, union risk, and so on, to allow them to assess this risk, because assessing this risk is key, critical consideration for the private companies and MDB to participate in a project. Lastly, having a master plan, having a roadmap will boost community morale. The community, Singaporeans will be aware, will realize that not only we have a disciplined, far-sighted government, we also have a plan so as to improve our livability in Singapore. Now with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass the mic to Seth, and we can discuss more at the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuan. Now, I would like to remind the audience that you can ask any questions along the way in the Q&A function, and then we'll pick up the response when we go to the audience Q&A section towards the end of this presentation. So don't hesitate to ask questions along the way rather than wait until the end. Many have commented that the public health infrastructure is very important, but difficult to finance. This seems like a very good opportunity to review the results of the poll that everyone participated at the beginning. Very interestingly, the question that was asked is, how has the pandemic impacted the financing of environmental public health infrastructure like wastewater, solid waste, etc.? And the answers, actually, most of you find that it makes it harder, because the economic downturn and the new measures such as social distancing have impeded investments. But 1/3 of you actually thought it made it easier. So quite interesting. I think it is now a good time to move on to Mr. Pang Yi-Yen, who has the experience in both the multilateral development banks and now coming back to the private sector and managing private funds. I would like to invite Mr. Pang to share his thoughts. And before that, I would like to ask one question to him. Hopefully he'll seed that into his presentation, which is, what are some of the key challenges that multilateral development banks and private funds face in supporting infrastructure for public health, especially in Asia? With that, the mic is yours, Yi-Yen.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be part of this webinar, sharing about the financing on the public health infrastructure. So Dinesh earlier on mentioned that I've just transited from AIIB to back to Seberang Jurong, and this actually I did this in the middle of this COVID-19 fiasco, so to speak, which is still going on. And we had to work. I had to work till the last day of my work, and the multilateral development world right now is still busy with handling this pandemic. I would classify that there are 4 main areas that multilateral development banks like World Bank, ADB, AIIB, what are we busy with? Number 1, the pandemic control, the actual control measures on the ground. That's what the we're helping the countries to implement and finance them. The healthcare system has significantly weakened over this pandemic period, and therefore multilaterals are stepping in to help with that. There's also a concern on the fiscal budget conditions of the governments. This is especially true for countries that are in the developing world with very huge debt burden with them. And that works into their foreign exchange and so on and so forth. And last but not least is the economy. With the lockdown, with the situation of the economic stifling, the holding back of the economy to control the pandemic, we can see that economic systems are weakened. For example, banking, local banks have problem with liquidity. We see the ability of government subsidizing some of these essential operations weakening. So therefore, the multilateral development banks have focused a lot on financing in this aspect. And ADB rolls out about 20 billion in the last few months alone. AIB about 10 billion, being a little smaller. World Bank mentioned that they have done 14 in March, but by now they should have done a lot more. So there's a lot of financing going on. I'm glad to discuss this topic of public health at the request of the organizers, because in this COVID situation, it does expose the weakness of our public health systems, the lacking of appropriate infrastructure, for example, clean water, proper disposal of waste, and so on and so forth, that were already there before COVID, all right, has been made worse. And there are many challenges to this. For example, even before, in the 2019 report by WHO, World Health Organization, 2 billion of the world's population still do not get water, clean water. So that is very significant number. For us in Sabana, Jurong, we are always been involved in public health infrastructure. For example, in Singapore, this project that you see, Punggol Waterway, is my favorite project. All right, Sabana Jurong's contribution in this part of this reservoir development. Part of it is a park development has created a better environment for the citizens staying in the northeast of Singapore, and we were very proud of it. Another example that Sabana Jurong has always been in this type of project that we have always been involved, desalination. Right, this is Adelaide's desalination project. It supplies half of Adelaide's population with water supply. So these are important projects, and not to mention the many projects that we do on the smaller scale. All right, there is a lot of challenges that we, as you can see, we mentioned 2 billion without water, and 300 million in Asia alone does not have pipe water. So that, and we are looking at about 800 over 1,000 people a year dying of inappropriate hygiene standards of contaminated water. So that there are a lot of reasons why we should be putting money, putting financing to it and getting this problem solved. But why is it not happening until now? We are still struggling, especially as city grows. I attribute it to 3 reasons. Number 1, the unsustainable old ways. All right, water. The traditional way of water supply in built-up areas is still dependent on the groundwater. So extracting the groundwater as the cities grow. All right, this is an old way that has existed. Then with the waste of the cities increasing, we start to have massive landfill, and then insinuate them in the open. And what this picture that you see is a project that we're trying to, AIB was working on in Maldives. They have a rubbish island where they openly burn the rubbish, and that's causing a lot of pollution to the nearby islands, which a lot of you might even go there for your holidays. So it doesn't make sense at all. So all this are happening because these old ways are cheap, and for that matter, sometimes even zero cost. It does not require capital expenditure, and therefore these are existing till now. And it makes new financing of new methods, more acceptable, sustainable methods, very difficult because of the cost hurdle. The second reason is the irony of the essentials. For example, water. Water is something that every citizen is entitled to have. Every city dweller of a city is entitled to have. All right, and therefore governments felt compelled to give the water free or to charge very little for it. They can't charge a lot for it. And that makes the burden of financing rest upon the government. And because it has no revenue, the private sector cannot step into the shoes of the government. And therefore the government is left so-called fending for itself. And as over time, infrastructures like this start to deteriorate, there isn't enough financing, especially in developing countries. And the third reason that I would say is the municipal limitation, or I'll be a little blunt, I call it the municipal trap. The municipal trap, because for us in Singapore, we may not feel it because our essential services are not run by municipal concept. We are run at the country level. But for most of the world, we have municipals in the village, in the town, in the city, who are in charge of such public health infrastructure. And they are the ones responsible for the financing. And that makes it very challenging because they have limited revenue capability. They have other priorities as they go, and they are elected government sometimes, or elected municipals sometimes, and they have priorities that are a little different. And third, do they have the capacity, the talent, the leadership to bring about fundamental changes? So for these three reasons, investing in public health infrastructure has always been not second nature to governments, and especially big projects. And then for the private sector, we are interested very often in energy projects, in road projects, but seldom going into the public health. And this is very sad because this obviously is an essential part of financing that's needed. But the good news is I do see increasing interventions from central governments, multilaterals, and even NGOs, like what Minister Indrani has mentioned earlier. I love this picture. This picture is our subsidiary company, Snowy Mountain Engineering Corporation, SMEC. They were doing a waste study. So they're sorting out the waste and analyzing what sort of waste that the city, the 140 municipals of Philippines actually generate. This is a study commissioned by the central government to make such a study so that they can analyze how are they going to manage their waste forward. And with that, we can see more of plants like waste treatment, waste to energy plants coming out. And then NGOs, you heard of the Gates Foundation, you heard of the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development investing in such public health infrastructure. All right, so we're going to see a lot more participation moving forward. And that's why I hope that all of us have a common expectation that the coming decade will be one that the private sector will take a bigger role in public health infrastructure. With that, I hand over back to Seth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think now is a good time to move to the audience questions. We have already quite a couple of questions that are streaming in. So apologize if we can't address all of them, but we do our best, given that we are already at for 40 minutes into the webinar. The first question, if the questions can be flashed up, is how different would infrastructure planning in cities be in 5 to 10 years compared to before the current health and economic crisis? And this is asked by Eugene from McDonald in the US. Mr. Loh, would you like to have a go at this question?
Can I start by answering this question by saying that when I joined the government civil service, Ministry of the Environment, we're looking at solid waste management. That was in the 70s. At that time, we looked at solid waste as a waste, a public health issue, sanitation issue, hygiene issue. So what we need to do is to set up a system, a solid waste management system, so that the waste can be collected promptly, the waste can be, after collection, conveyed, and then to treat or dispose of it. Because Singapore has lack of land, there's a conflict of interest in wanting to develop land. Therefore, our last sanitary dumping ground, if you like, and at the northeastern part of Singapore, the URA, the chief planner, told us that, okay, by the end of the 90s, no more land for you. So the question asked is that, what the hell are we going to do with the rubbish that we generate? Are we going to eat it? The chief planner said, well, you're an engineer, you think about it, okay? But they gave us quite a number of years. Therefore, what happened is that, so if you look at it, so if you look at solid waste as a waste, solid waste as a public issue, your focus is how to deal with this public health issue, public health problem. Therefore, obviously, your planning of the solid waste will be quite different. Now, today, you look at public solid waste. You don't just look at it as a solid waste, a public health issue only. You look at it as a fuel, like oil, like gas, and so on, because you collect the waste, it's a fuel, and then you burn it in the incineration plant, waste to energy plant, and you generate electricity. Therefore, once you look at it in a different manner, therefore, your planning is different. Today's planning and in the past is different. Now, more so nowadays, besides looking at solid waste as a fuel to generate electricity, then you talk about thermal efficiency and so on, to increase the amount of electricity generated per unit of solid waste burn. Now we're talking about sustainable production. You go upstream, sustainable production. Therefore, you design something that is more robust, that will last longer, that can be reused and recycled and so on. And you talk about waste management, sustainable waste management, and you talk about sustainable consumption. People, how do people consume the goods? You just don't buy and use and then throw. So it's no longer a linear economy. Now it's a circular economy. So you put that in the 70s, which we talk about solid waste as a waste public issue, to in the 90s and the turn of century, we talk about solid waste as a fuel to generate electricity, to generate electricity, and then you talk. Then now you move upwards to say that, okay, it is now circular economy, sustainable production, sustainable waste management, and sustainable consumption. Now, if you look at this historically, we have to move with time. Therefore, when you do planning of your solid waste management in any city, I wouldn't say which one is better than the other. In fact, they all are important. Therefore, when you manage it, you can look at all three at one go. That's how I would look at it, how to plan solid waste management in Singapore. Now, I have retired more than about 12 years ago. At that time, I just purely looking at it, moving from a public health issue to one that generates as much electricity as possible because it's a fuel. Therefore, one big concern to me is how to increase the thermal efficiency of the WTE plant. Now, if I'm still in the service looking at this problem again, God forbid, I will be looking at circular economy. That's how I will plan my solid waste management system in the city.
Thanks.
My take of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Low, could I trouble you to turn on your video? I think the organizers have difficulty turning on it remotely. Very good. We can see you now. Could we have the second question? The second question is, given the highly volatile and uncertain environment, how can cities build flexibility into their infrastructure plans? With that, maybe I would like to challenge Ian to take a step at this question: how to build flexibility.
First, I would say that to start off with, every city and every country has its own challenges, and that whatever answer I give will be a little different to deploy it differently. But I think if we're going to look at a typical city in the Asian context, we must know that funding will be a challenge. If the funding will be a challenge, then what can we do? What are the alternatives in managing this kind of volatility? Because investors never like volatility. They may look for low returns, but they just want to be, just want projects to perform as they expect in the steady state, So I think it is important that the government steps in to provide that assurance. Sometimes it might be in the form of viability gap. That means if revenue falls short, if plans are delayed, the government is prepared to step in. If the government does not have the capability to support these projects, then the multilateral development banks and the bilateral arrangements will be the ones that could step into the shoe to so-called even off the risks to help private sector or project sponsors or even EPC contractors trying to do the project. They need the assurance that eventually the money will be paid. If not, they will factor into the price. And if the price goes up, it will be even more formidable to deploy to get the project going. So therefore, it is important to manage volatility. In specific to this COVID volatility, we do expect the larger projects to slow down or if not stop. But we do think that the bite-sized projects should continue because they are easier to manage. The expectations of performance is better controlled. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, looking at some of the data that has come up, just in the project finance world, the total volume of deals done on a project finance basis in this part of the world actually has not slowed down, but the overall size of each loan that was done, it has been coming down during the COVID situation. I think precisely as you have mentioned, Ian. One of the things that I thought could be useful, I guess, as a reflection is also technology, because increasingly technology is an enabler to help build some flexibility and resilience, and it also consequently makes infrastructure a little bit less expensive, because technology and technological improvements can help build that resilience against volatility as well. Maybe now we have time for just 2 more questions. If I can invite the host to show the third question. So this question is interesting. Where do you start when creating the master plan? What do you think is the first aspect of the master plan that is most important to do at the start? I think this question sounds like it's targeted toward Mr. Loh. Mr. Loh, do you want to give a step at it?
Any time is a good time to start creating a master plan. But seriously, city manager, city official, when they run the city, they look at the city, rubbish all over the place, waste all over the place, and so on. Now, my experience working with, I wouldn't say working with some city as well. I've been to many cities, talking to the mayor, talking to the party sec, and so on. My impression is that they have this problem. They inherited this problem because they just been elected, just been appointed mayor, and so they inherited this problem. Now, what they do is that they said that, okay, I want technology. Technology, that would, I keep telling them, technology are good. Technology will not solve your problem. You require a system. The system is governance. You must have the correct policy, you must have the right regulations, and you must have the right system so that, you know, everything built into so that the master plan can go. It must go concurrently. And what is more important is that every city mayor you talk to, they have a vision for the city, whether it is clean and green or livability or whatever, a city in a garden, whatever it is. They have one of the fundamental issues besides traffic congestions is solid waste management and this, what we call it, the wastewater. Therefore, these master plan got to be tied in together with city development master plan, urban development. So it's very important that the city official look at it, not just, like I said in my presentation, a standalone. It must be integrated to the overall. And you can start anything, anytime. Anytime is a good time, as I said. Like Singapore in 1965, when we became independent, you look at it, honestly, when I was a young engineer, I despair. As a young engineer, my director told me, go and sort out the solid waste problem. I say, how? Slowly, you look at it. If you analyze it, and it boils down to more in terms of people's attitude, whether in the civil service, in the private sector, or in the community, and so on. You got to slowly change it, and so on, and move along this way. And that's how you do your master plan. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. I think we have only time for one last question. I know many questions have been asked. Post this event, we will make sure we share the questions with the panelists to see whether they can address further questions and send it back to you to the extent that we can. But thanks for all the participation in terms of the questions asked. But let's go on to the last question. This one is an interesting one asked by Nawa. What are the best strategies to bring in funds and investment, in other words, engage private sector to transfer cities to smart, interactive, and sustainable cities? I think this goes to the poll as well, which interestingly, half of you feel that the pandemic has made it more difficult to attract. But 1/3 of you feels that it's easier. So perhaps I could throw this last question to Ian. What are the key things to bring MDBs or private sector into investing in environmental public health infrastructure, assuming you got all the governance right, you have the master plan, but you still need money? What do you do? What do you focus on?
Actually, thanks for the question, because in my career of investing in urban and infrastructure, at even the worst of times, even in 06 or 07, 08, and so on and so forth, there wasn't a shortage of money. There wasn't any shortage of money. There's always a shortage of good projects. It's amazing. And if there are, I would say, if there is $1 worth of project in the market, there are easily $4 to $5 of investment money as we counted it when I was in AIB. So there is more than enough money in the market to finance projects. So I think it boils down to earlier on what Antoine has mentioned. Is the preparation of the project. I would say even one step back is the leadership of the projects. Are the projects prepared to the extent that it is low-hanging enough for the investment folks of both multilaterals and even private sector, or for that matter, even NGOs? Are they able to take the project and go? All right. That's where there's a big gap. So I asked for stronger leadership. Just now I mentioned about the issue at the municipal level, for public health especially. When the municipal level need to be very strong, right? They need to be visionary. And between what the municipal and the government could produce versus what is investable, there is this gap. And this gap is what I would say where the consultants play a big role. The consultants, whether it's a technical consultant, the legal consultant, the finance consultant, these are the ones that would have to facilitate bringing this concept or this strong master plan to bring for funding. All right. Sometimes the funders will move towards towards the sponsors, but usually not the case. So the consultants play a very big role to make the project more easily understood, the finance stronger, the guarantees in place, or for that matter, addressing some of these concerns, like let's say it's a foreign investor investing on a local project. What happens to a local currency, convertibility, and other forms of risk assurance? So I think there is a role for everyone, and we need to do it. And I as I concluded in my presentation, I say that my take is that the next decade is a decade for private sector participation because of the technology development that move costs downwards. All right, that made what was previously impossible. And for that to happen, the consultants and the sponsors must look at technology seriously. Seriously. If I may quote this, if those of us in the solar photovoltaic sector is familiar, is that within 8 years, the cost of solar panel fell to only 15% of what was the past. And that made the technology deployable very fast. And so now it's so competitive. We used to pay 20 cents, US cents per kilowatt hour. Now we are talking about 3 or even 2 US cents per kilowatt hour. All right, and things move very fast. And then with the policy support and countries imitating each other, you can see solar PV is multiplying across Asia right now, and it's very, very, very fast. That is a good thing. And it is not the only one. Desalination is also moving in that pace, the reverse osmosis and other forms of technology. So I would say that this is happening. The PPP is getting the hang of, the governments are getting a hang of structuring PPPs. We're getting better at it. And then with Infra Asia helping some of our neighbor countries, doing some advertisements for you, Seth, to prepare the project. I would say that it's going to be happening in the next decade. I see there will be a lot more investable opportunities for private sector, for multilateral, for NGOs, and even for the government.
Seth, can I just jump in for a couple of minutes to add on to what Ian have said?
Sure.
Absolutely agree with you, Ian, what you have said, right? What you are talking about here is, why would a bank, what will make a project a bankable project? If you look at, I've been to several cities in this region, the city mayors, the city chief planner and all that, they look at it, they say that, okay, this is a particular project. They got a technical consultant, technology consultant, all sorts of people coming up. Now, by doing a technical report, go to AIIB or ADB or World Bank, would you make it bankable? Would you provide a grant? And I look at some of the proposal, well, I'm not a banker, I will not approve, because where's the sustainability? Where is the big picture from stop to end? Therefore, poor communities. So therefore, it's important that you not only get the specialists, the experts, technology experts, the financial expert, legal expert to look at the nitty-gritty and so on, but you need to have, if you like, a strategic advisor, like Mr. Koo Teng Chia always put it, a strategic advisor, a practitioner who have gone through the grind and gone through all the scolding he has gotten. Therefore, you try to look at it and you were to prepare a proposal on that basis. I think your chances are much, much better for the bank to approve the project. And I'm glad to hear, in fact, the president of AIIB 3 years ago, is it in Mumbai? Ian, I met you there. Yeah. One of the things he said in his opening remark, he said, we got plenty of money, but you guys got no good project. And the other thing he said, you may have forgotten, not exactly what I'm going to say, you guys don't know how to prepare a project proposal. And this is exactly true, because they are consultants, and there's a lot of commercial company out there competing, to sell to the city management, city officials. Therefore, I think beside looking at all beside looking at a project, you can look at the entire system, the governance and so on. And then what is important to my mind is, Mr. Koo Teng Chia always said, we need to have strategic advisor, not just advisor, strategic advisor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the Minister. I think Minister has some comments on these questions as well.
Yes, it was an interesting question, because your question actually underlines the premise on which Infrastructure Asia was set up. There is no shortage of funds, as Pang Yen has pointed out. The shortage is in good or bankable projects. And when I first came to this space, I was trying to understand what did they mean by bankability. And the answer was that it is something that the banks would be willing to invest in. And if you think about it, why would a bank invest? This is project finance, which means that the project must be able to finance itself. That means that whatever the project is, whether it's an energy project, whether it's a waste to energy or whatever it is, the revenue streams must be sufficient to pay back the bank, or you must have something that comes in midway and allows you to take out the bank, pay them off, and then you take over. So that goes, so in summary, I think both what Mr. Loh and Pang Yen have been saying is that the project has to be properly structured beforehand. And that means proper project preparation. And project preparation means first the financial preparation, the technical feasibility of the project, because if it's technically not feasible, it just won't get off the ground. Then you have to make sure that there is the legal preparation, and you also have to make provision for disputes in case something goes wrong. And anybody who's ever been involved in either construction or infrastructure will know that disputes arise somewhere along the line. And so these are the things that go into making sure that the project is bankable. And in order to do that, you do need professional consultants. So when we came into the picture and we looked at it, we realized that many projects that wanted to set up did not have these services. And we then set up Infrastructure Asia in order to connect the demand and the supply. In other words, to connect the projects that were wanted to set up with the consultants that were located either in Singapore or elsewhere, but with whom we had a network of contacts. So I just wanted to explain that it was this very need that drove the setting up of Infrastructure Asia, whose main mission in life is to connect supply and demand to make projects bankable.
Thank you, Minister, for your comments. I think we are almost out of time. So with that, I will do a quick wrap up. Public health infrastructure is an area of strength for Singapore ecosystem. And combining with new possibilities in finance and investment, more funding can be deployed into the region from Singapore. Beyond what the Ian and Mr. Loh have shared, we think there's scope to increase access and tapping of private sector, including social funds. Likewise, there are possibilities for technology to increase commercial viability of projects through closer monitoring. Thanks, Minister, for your kind words on Infrastructure Asia and also explaining the mission of our office. And indeed, Infrastructure Asia as a project facilitation office aims to better bridge supply and demand to match the risk appetite of the investors with the right projects. In current times, digital bridges such as this webinar can help raise awareness of the good offerings that are available in the market, help you find new partners, and even discuss on specific opportunities. So we urge everyone, if you have a need, you have a topic you want to discuss further, do reach out to either CLC, any of the panelists, and certainly to Infrastructure Asia, if you are looking to solve any problems or find a new partner. With that, I thank you very much for your time in joining us in this webinar, and I pass the floor back to Dinesh.
Thank you very much, Seth. And thank you again, Minister Indrani Raja, Seth, for moderating this panel so masterfully, and to our two expert panel speakers, Loh Tuan and Pang En. And let me echo Seth's call at the end that if you are facing infrastructure challenges in your city and are looking for support, be it knowledge, training, advice, or help to find partners, do reach out to us. Before leaving the topic of environmental infrastructure, let me share that the second edition of CLC's book, Water, From Scarce Resource to National Asset, is now available on our website. It was first published in 2012 as the inaugural title in our Urban System Studies series. Among other updates and improvements, this second edition contains a new postscript by Mr. Ng Joo Hee, the Chief Executive of PUB, Singapore's National Water Agency, on how Singapore should prepare herself to address future water challenges. Please use the QR code to download the book for free. Our next webinar will be back on a Thursday in 2 weeks on the 30th of July. It is titled Sponge Cities, Leveraging Nature as Ecological Infrastructure. Our renowned speaker is Professor Yu Kong Jian of Turenscape, who will share how sponge cities and ecological infrastructure help cities to adapt to the climate crisis while creating livable and often very beautiful spaces. Joining us for the panel discussion is Dr. Thomas Schropfer from the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Please register to attend using the QR code or the link. This webinar has been live streamed on CLC's Facebook page, and we'll upload a recording of it within the next hour or so on our CLC YouTube channel, where you can find over 500 other videos, including several related to financing infrastructure. Finally, thank you to you, our audience, for your participation. We hope you find these webinars useful. Before you leave, please use the QR code or link to fill in our feedback form. Do tell us what works and how we can do better. This is the end of today's webinar, but we'll be leaving this room open for another 10 minutes or so. We invite you to linger if you like and exchange comments with each other using the chat box. Until our next webinar on the 30th of July, goodbye and stay healthy.